Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are looking at a truly fascinating piece of literary analysis that completely reimagines how we understand Gabriel García Márquez's absolute masterpiece. Now, before we really get going, I want to mention that for the full, incredible imaginary conversation we're breaking down today, you should absolutely visit imaginarytalks.com/100 Years of Solitude Explained by Top Scholars. It's this brilliant read where the author himself sits down with top literary scholars right in the middle of Macondo. It's a fantastic resource. Okay, let's dive right into this.
So think about your own family for a second. Have you ever looked at a repeating conflict or, even a repeating name and asked yourself, are we trapped by fate or are we just trapped by patterns we completely fail to recognize? This right here is the central Socratic hook of the Buendía family's struggle. It's what draws us in. We look at them and honestly, we end up seeing ourselves.
Okay, let's look at how we're going to unpack this today. We'll start at the micro level with the family pattern, then we'll explore the architecture of solitude, rethink magical realism, zoom out to the macro level meaning of Macondo, and finally uncover exactly why the novel endures.
Section 1, the family pattern, breaking the cycle.
Now, if you know the book, you already know about that incredibly tangled Buendía family tree, where generations just repeat the exact same names and, tragically, the exact same mistakes. The family views this as destiny. They think they're doomed by this cyclical fate. But as the scholars point out, it's actually just inherited wounds. What looks like some grand destiny is really just trauma and survival mechanisms passed down from one generation to the next, mostly because nobody is interpreting the past. The original wound goes completely invisible, so the pattern just looks like personality.
This quote hits the nail on the head. Sometimes they repeat themselves because love has been tied to memory, fear, duty, pride, and silence so tightly that no one knows which thread to cut. The scholars actually joke that if the Buendías lived today, their family group chat would be an absolute nightmare. I mean, everyone would be muting it, Ursula would be trying to micromanage it, but the deep, foundational truths would remain totally hidden behind the technology.
Section 2, the architecture of solitude, the empty chairs. Picture this, a wide veranda, the rain is just pouring down, and there's a table set for 12, but only 5 people are seated. Those empty chairs really forces us to stop and ask, what is solitude, really? I want you to rethink this whole concept for a minute. In Macondo, solitude is rarely about being physically alone in a room. These characters are surrounded by people, spouses, children, literal armies, and yet they remain completely and utterly isolated. Take a matriarch like Ursula. She holds the entire family together, but as the quote says, strength is one of the loneliest reputations a person can acquire. She is desperately needed by everyone, but known emotionally by practically no one. She's basically the infrastructure of the family, and just like infrastructure, she's only noticed if she fails. Ultimately, solitude in Macondo takes on so many different forms. The men, like Colonel Aureliano, often retreat into these endless obsessions, like making and melting those little gold fishes, using solitude as an identity just to avoid intimacy. Then you have that tragic distance between being seen and actually being understood. But perhaps the most fascinating one is this last point, epistemological isolation. That's what happens when you hold a truth, like surviving a massacre, that the entire public officially denies. It directly connects your private, personal loneliness to political erasure.
Moving on to Section 3, rethinking magical realism, the floating laundry.
Imagine a sun-drenched courtyard where white laundry suddenly lifts off the clothesline and just floats straight up into the sky. Now, people always ask about magical realism, but the scholars in our source conversation redefine it so brilliantly. The crucial point here is that it's not simply fantasy. It is the survival of another way of knowing. It's this culturally specific blend of indigenous, African, and Catholic storytelling. It's an emotional truth that just point-blank refuses to obey literal boundaries. Just look at this stark contrast. On one side, you have official reality, a government formally and legally denying a massacre of its own people. On the other side, you have magical realism, a woman physically floating into heaven. The scholars argue that institutions use formal official language to completely erase violence and construct a fake reality. And when you look at it in that context, the so-called magic of a woman ascending into the sky actually feels way more honest. Let this quote land heavily for a second. A massacre denied by everyone in authority is more fantastic than a woman rising into heaven. Power controls tone, right? If a government says something impossible in a very formal voice, people accept it as a fact. But if a grandmother says something impossible in her kitchen, people just call it magic. Section 4. The meaning of Macondo. The arriving train.
This shift in power transforms Macondo from a micro-level family drama into a massive mirror of global history. Just look at the civilizational arc of the town. It goes from a totally isolated village to discovery when gypsies bring new technology, to industrialization with the railway, which leads straight into foreign intervention by the banana company, and it all culminates in erasure, mass violence followed by a forced official forgetting. The town literally becomes a pawn in an international economic system.
Which really forces us to ask, what happens when a place loses control over its own story? Because once Macondo became legible and visible to outside powers, once it could be mapped out and measured for profit, it became incredibly vulnerable to extraction. And this exposes the dual nature of what we so often call progress. Sure, the train brings electricity, transport, and connection, but it also imports outside authority. It brings severe segregation, violent exploitation, and ultimately historical amnesia. But here's the catch. The outside world didn't just invent these flaws out of nowhere. They expertly exploited the vulnerabilities, the pride, and the silences that the town already had.
This dynamic leads to the ultimate tragedy of the town. Macondo is any place that mistakes being remembered for understanding itself. Think about how relevant that is today. Modern tourist towns, or even our own personal digital archives, perfectly preserve a name, a location, or an image, while completely gutting its actual soul and context.
And finally, Section 5, Why the Novel Endures, Reading the Wind.
Imagine a dusty reading room with the wind just rattling the windows. Why does this 100-year-old cycle of a fictional family feel so incredibly urgent to you and me right now? Well, consider the novel's famous insomnia plague, where the town slowly forgets the names and functions of everyday objects. The scholars actually compare this to modern digital amnesia. Today, we outsource all our memories to the cloud and to social media. We have an absolute abundance of preserved data, pictures of every meal, every single vacation, but we are losing all the actual meaning and context. We're naming everything, but understanding nothing. Ultimately, the book operates on so many levels at once. It survives because of its unforgettable visceral imagery, like the shock of discovering ice or a literal rain of yellow flowers. It survives because it acts as a mirror. Readers across the globe recognize their own messy family cycles in the Buendias. It gives us a space to mourn our own rapidly vanishing worlds. And most importantly, it serves as a massive, glaring warning about historical recurrence. It forces us to look around our own world and ask, is history truly finished? Or is it just wearing new clothes? The novel teaches us to be incredibly suspicious of anyone who claims that the old dangers are forever locked away in the past. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought from the source text. Macondo represents what happens when people believe history is something arriving from somewhere else. The reality is, history isn't just sitting in some textbook. It is already inside you. It's in your family names, your unhealed wounds, your group chats, and your silences. The only way to break the cycle is to finally learn how to read it.